All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. Michael Cohen here with you. We are back on the Sports Talk Nation, and yes, opening day is here for Major League Baseball. We haven't done a lot of stuff on spring training this year because, well, it's been a really weird spring training. Let's just say that. It's been a spring training that in some ways, at least from both teams, the Mets and the Yankees, has been really a downer in a lot of ways. And I can't sit here and tell you, on a year, coming off of the year we had last year in 2024, where we saw the New York Mets go all the way to the NLCS, and we saw the Yankees go all the way to the World Series. We saw the two teams battle out for Juan Soto during the offseason, and yet as we sit here now, just a couple of days away from the start of the 2025 regular season, I can't sit here and tell you that I'm excited. In fact, I'm a little, cautiously optimistic, if that, maybe even a little more pessimistic, because I think that these are two teams, and in the case of the Mets, a team that has some issues. Really, both teams have issues, especially in the pitching department, as we get set for the 2025 season to kick things off. And we're going to start it off here just talking about the Mets first, because throughout the course of the spring, injuries, unfortunately, have become the story of the entire spring. Whether it be Sean Manaea, who will now be out until mid-April with the oblique strain, whether it be Frankie Montas, now out until June with a lat injury. Jeff McNeil, oblique strain. He's now out till at least maybe mid-April, maybe mid to late April. You have Nick Madrigal, who's going to be out for the entire season. This was the guy that the Mets brought in to replace Jose Iglesias, and that replacement is not going to be involved at all after he had a dislocated left shoulder. He's done for the year. You have Ronnie Mauricio still recovering from an ACL. He didn't participate in any games in spring training. Francisco Alvarez, a broken bone in his hand, out until, 8 weeks? We're talking now May for Francisco Alvarez. So you have all those injuries on top of injuries. Also, Brandon Nimmo coming back off of a knee injury that bothered him at the end of last season, and he only just got started swinging the bat late in spring training. So as we begin this season, and I look around this Mets team, I sit there and say, is this team going to be good enough to win an NL East? Right now, as it stands here, as we begin the season, the answer would probably be no. That does not mean that come July, come August, or even September, certainly September, that this is a team that can't win the division. They may, in fact, do that, but if the Mets are going to be a serious contender this year, they are going to have to utilize all 162 of these games, much the way they did just a year ago, where it came all the way down to the last day of the season with that doubleheader against the Atlanta Braves. Now, yes, the one thing that the Mets have going for them is this. They have Juan Soto. And I know you Yankee fans out there don't like to hear it. And I know Yankee fans are upset that Juan Soto left the Yankees for the Mets. How could he do such a thing? Well, you know what? Mets paid him a little bit more and also guaranteed his family a little more amenities. That's why he's over here in Queens and not the Bronx. But the fact is, you just base it off of spring training stats, which I hate to do. Man, the Mets have a player here who is going to keep them not just in games, but is such a threat that is going to extend this lineup. The power that he can provide, the eye that he has at the plate, the ability for him to not just get base hits and home runs, but to also draw walks and just extend innings. He is probably the best hitter, maybe one of the best hitters in baseball outside of maybe a Shohei Ohtani right now. So for the Mets to have him in their lineup, probably batting second or third, depending on how the Mets want to organize things come opening day and most of the season, he is going to be the key piece to this entire season. If Juan Soto has a typical Juan Soto year where he hits, 35 or more home runs, drives in, certainly, 95 to 110 RBIs, Mets are going to be in a great situation. Is he going to hit 41 home runs like he did at the short porch of Yankee Stadium last year? Probably, I don't know, maybe not. But 35 home runs, 110 RBIs, if he does that in Queens this year, that's nothing to sneeze at. And if he does that and doesn't put a lot of pressure on himself, especially early in the season, he could be in for a big year. And that's going to be interesting to see in the early part of the year. Can Juan Soto with a lot of eyeballs on him after signing that big contract, does he put more pressure on himself to start the season off on a right foot for the Mets? We'll have to wait and see how that plays out. If he has smooth sailing in April, and when I say smooth sailing, I mean like 250, 265, certainly flexes the muscles early in the season for the home runs, and just looks like the hitter that you expect, he is going to be in for a huge campaign. Now, of course, when you also include Juan Soto in this conversation, you have to include Francisco Lindor, who was the Mets' best player last year, and of course Pete Alonso, who was coming off of a rough year last year with the exception of the postseason. And it's a big year for Alonso because, look, it's a 2-year contract. 1 year, basically, if he has a big year in 2025 this year, he could certainly opt out of his contract at the end of this year and seek a bigger deal. But this is going to be fun for Alonso because he's going to have a hitter like Juan Soto either hitting in front of him or behind him, depending on what the matchup is for the day. And that is a good problem to have if you are certainly Carlos Mendoza putting out that lineup. And certainly a good problem to have if you're Pete Alonso because that takes a lot of pressure off of him in the lineup. And he could in turn take some pressure off of Soto in the lineup. And then, of course, you have a player like Francisco Lindor leading things off who has just been all world. I mean, over the last couple of years, especially last year, just an incredible season for Lindor. And I expect nothing less from him in that regard. My big concern for the Mets going into the season is not only the standpoint of injuries, and there have been a lot of bad injuries to this team going into the season, as I just mentioned at the top, but it's also going to be the pitching staff. I have so many questions about the staff, and the fact that injuries play a big part in that leaves me a bit concerned as we get the season going. The Mets really don't have a true number one ace. In some regards, Sean Manaea is their ace, and he will not be a part of this rotation at least until the end of April, maybe beginning of May. And when you look at this rotation right now as it's currently constituted, where they're taking a look at Clay Holmes starting things off as your number one on opening day, then Tyler McGill, Griffin Channing as the number 3, David Peterson, who I thought probably should have been the starting pitcher on opening day when you look at this this rotation, and then Kodai Senga, who is coming off of an injury-riddled year last year. There's nothing but questions going into this season. I think the one guy we don't have questions of is Peterson because he had such a big year last year, 10 wins, had an ERA of around 2.90 and 21 starts, and as I said, I thought he should have been the opening day starter going in, but the Mets want to give it to Clay Holmes. Now, Holmes has not been a starter in his career since 2018 when he was at Pittsburgh. Of course, we all know he spent a large chunk of the last 5-6 years with the Yankees as their closer, if not even setup man. And do I feel confident with him as a starter over the long term? I'll say this. I think the way he pitched this year in spring training was very encouraging. 5 starts. Had an ERA of, 0.93 and 19 in the third innings. He looked good. We'll see how that translates to the regular season. I don't know what the pitch count is going to be for him when we get to the regular season. I can't imagine it being more than 65, 70 pitches, especially in the first start on Thursday against the Houston Astros. At least to start the season, maybe 65, maybe about it. But we'll be interested to see how he progresses as a starter over the course of the year. If what we saw in spring training is an indication of what Holmes can be as a starter, the Mets are going to be excited, and the Mets could have a huge surprise in their rotation in Clay Holmes. Now, if he struggles and he hits a wall at some point, which I would tend to expect would happen for a pitcher who hasn't been a starter in such a long time, certainly as we move towards the middle part of the year, that's going to be interesting to see how the Mets want to manage his innings. So I think he is a guy who's going to be a very big question mark. And then you have Tyler McGill, who has been with this team for a very long time. Kind of an inconsistent pitcher, although he was on the mound for the game the Mets needed to have at the end of the regular season last year. That big game down in Atlanta, he pitched 5 2/3, looked good in that game. More of a number 5 starter is Tyler McGill. Griffin Channing was more of a 5 starter when he was with the Angels last couple of years. And then we finished off with Senga, who a couple of years ago was great, right? The ghost pitch, everyone loved the way Senga was pitching. And then, of course, the injuries last year, just derailed his season last year. They tried to bring him back into the fold in the playoffs, and it just didn't work out. So where is Senga going to be as we move over the course of this year? And, how is he going to progress over the course of a long season? So that's why as we move into this 2025 season, I look at this Mets pitching staff and I say, if the Mets are going to be a serious playoff team this year, and considering the lineup they have with guys like Soto and Alonso and Francisco Lindor, they got to have more consistent starting pitching. And we'll see where they are come June or July and who is available at that point in time. I remember there was talk about Dylan Cease possibly being a trade piece during the offseason, but certainly the Padres, who right now certainly consider themselves a contender out in the West, certainly for the wild card, are not going to make that kind of move unless they just totally fall out of it. So we'll have to wait and see on that, but the Mets are certainly going to be in the market for pitching improvement, absolutely. Not just in the starting rotation, but even in the bullpen. I still feel, even with the addition of A.J. Minter there, who's probably going to be your setup guy for Edwin Diaz, the Mets could use another top-flight reliever in that bullpen. So as we go into this season, I'm very pessimistic about the pitching staff. It's my biggest concern going in. I'm also concerned about the ability for guys, as I mentioned, in the lineup to stay healthy. Francisco Alvarez is a guy who shown very good ability when healthy with some pop of the bat as a catcher. Does a fairly good job calling the game behind the plate, but he's had issues the last couple of years staying healthy. And while, yes, Luis Torrens has done a nice job when he has been called upon, remember last year in the London series where he had that big play that helped win the game for the Mets defensively, the Mets need Francisco Alvarez to be healthy, and they need him to be healthy so he can swing the bat in the middle of this lineup. Second base now becomes a huge question mark as well. And I think it was a question mark anyway, because with the Mets transitioning with so many young players like Luis Angel Acuna and Brett Baty, the long-term answer with Jeff McNeil, who's now, 32, 33 years old, the question about how much longer the Mets going to go with him at second base was going to be a question coming into the year. And now, after this oblique injury, well, we're going to have a chance to see what Baty and Acuna could do basically as a platoon at second base. So we'll see how that goes. Now, the thing with Baty is he had a great spring training. We all know in the regular season, though, it hasn't exactly been up to snuff. In the regular season, Brett Baty is a .215 hitter in the regular season. Can he be more consistent is the question. Can the guy that we see in spring training, can the guy that we see when he gets sent down to the minor leagues show up in the regular season at the big league level for the New York Mets? If he can do that, he'll get a lot more opportunities at second base. And remember, that inconsistency is the reason why he ended up losing that third base job to Mark Vientos, who had an outstanding year last year for the Mets at third. And if it's Acuna, can he grab the bull by the horns and take it? I think a lot of people would like to see that because the Mets made that big trade a couple of years ago to go out and get him. He is a top prospect, once with the Rangers, now here with the Mets. We'll see what he can do at second base when the matchup favors him against the left-handers. So that's going to happen at second base. So I have questions there as far as the injuries are concerned there. And then the outfield, we all know Juan Soto is going to be in right. Can Brandon Nimmo stay healthy? He's now going to be in left field. I have questions about center field. Jose Siri has a lot of pop in the bat, but he's also a guy who doesn't hit a whole heck of a lot. Jose Siri, I think, is like a .220 lifetime hitter. Jose Siri actually is a .210 lifetime hitter. I actually gave him a little more credit than he's due. A .210 lifetime hitter, although he does have pop in the bat. But again, not a guy who's going to give you consistent at-bats. And considering the Mets once had a guy in Harrison Bader who would give you consistent at-bats, that's kind of a drop-off in some ways, at least in my mind, going from Bader to now Siri potentially in center field. So you have that concerned. And then, look, Starling Marte, another person talk about, possibly putting him up for a trade. I wouldn't do it. I think he's one of the more consistent hitters for this Mets team over the last few years. I think Starling Marte is a big, important piece. I'd like to see him be a DH a little bit more. You also have Jesse Winker in there as well. Two very good players. I'd like to see a little more of. We'll see how that plays out. If it was a perfect world for me and Brandon Nimmo was healthy, I would rather see him in center field and see a Marte Winker platoon in left field. I'd rather see that in my mind for the Mets, but it doesn't feel like they're going to do that. It hasn't felt like they're going to go that way at all, even in spring training. So as we begin this 2025 season, what are my expectations? What do the Mets need to do to be successful in 2025? To me, well, they've got to find a way. You don't need to get off to a fast start, but you need to get off to a solid start. And you need to find a way just to hang around early enough in this year with Atlanta and Philadelphia. And when you get some guys back and you get healthier and maybe even make a couple of moves to make your run as you get towards July. That's obviously the key for any franchise. But for the biggest for the Mets, it's going to be how they are able to navigate this pitching staff and navigate some of the injuries of some of their older players and whether some of the young guys can actually step up. So if I had to put a number on what I think the Mets can do in 2025, based off of what I know right now, I think this is at best an 85-win team. And I know some people are out there, how could you say that? I could say that because there's too many question marks. There's too many what-ifs about this team going into the year. As good as they are as far as the talent is concerned, especially on the star players, they need their star players to be all-world. They need their star players to show up every single night and deliver big time. And whether it be Soto, whether it be Alonso, Lindor, Brandon Nimmo, if you want to consider him a star in this team, you want to throw out there a Edwin Diaz coming out of the bullpen, and someone in this rotation also needs to step up and be a star if this team is going to have any chance to push Atlanta and Philadelphia in the NL East. So right now, I would say at best an 85-win team coming into the year for the New York Mets. We'll see how things play out. Folks, opening day is just a couple of days away. Leave your thoughts below. We'll talk to you next time.